I'll destroy everything and everyone. I'm the upgrade.
Homelander is a different kind of villain, not the kind we're used to, the kind who twirls a mustache or has some grand ideology that, while flawed, is at least understandable. He's something else entirely, something worse. Every second he's on screen, there's this unbearable tension. It's like watching a glass fall from a table in slow motion, knowing it's going to shatter, but not knowing when. What makes him so uniquely terrifying isn't just the destruction he can unleash, though that certainly helps. It's the sheer unpredictability of it. When a character is up against Darth Vader, at least you know the rules. Fail him and he'll choke you out. Betray him and you're dead. Simple, logical even. But with Homelander, there's nothing simple. His emotional state dictates his actions, and his emotional state is a volatile mess of unchecked narcissism, childhood trauma, and a desperate need to be worshipped. And that makes him terrifying in a way very few villains ever manage. It's not just his power that makes him horrifying. Power on its own isn't scary. It's the way he chooses to use it. We all know what happens when someone gets too much unchecked power. But Homelander isn't just powerful, he's a god who was raised in a lab, deprived of love, human connection, or any real moral framework. There's no one in the world who can stop him, and worse, there's no one in the world he truly respects. That's what makes him different. That's what makes every interaction with him a tightrope walk over a canyon. There's a particular kind of horror that comes with power imbalances, the kind where one person holds complete control over another.
What did you say?
What did you say to me? I'm sorry. Shit. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it.
A gun to the head, a boss who can fire you, a toxic relationship where one person holds all the financial stability. These dynamics are terrifying, not because we wonder who will win, we already know who will win, but because we don't know how bad it's going to get. That's what Homelander embodies. He doesn't just win, he decides whether you even get to play the game. And the worst part? There's something about him that's disturbingly recognizable. He's not a demon or a monster from another dimension. He's not the embodiment of chaos or destruction. He's a man, deeply insecure, utterly self-obsessed, desperate for validation, and furious at the world for not being enough for him. And that should scare us more than any superpower. I think about his interactions with the world, the way people have to navigate around him. They have to smile, to flatter, to never show a single ounce of disrespect. It's not enough to simply obey him. He needs you to love him, to worship him. And if you don't, well, we've seen how that goes. That scene with the blind superhero always sticks with me, because it's not just the cruelty of it, it's the timing, the way he plays with expectation. We expect the usual superhero welcome, the handshake, the welcome to the team, kid. And for a moment, that's exactly what we get, until it isn't. And the horror of that moment isn't just in the violence, but in the reversal.
Speak for us! Speak for us! Speak for us!
The sudden realization that none of this was ever safe, that none of this was ever going to go the way we expected. That's what true horror is. Not just knowing something terrible is coming, but thinking for just a second that maybe it won't. There's another layer to Homelander that makes him even worse, something beyond his cruelty or his godlike powers. It's his fragility. Not physical fragility, of course. No one can so much as scratch him, but emotional, psychological. His entire identity is built on the idea that he is superior to everyone, that he is perfect, and yet, at the same time, he's painfully, horribly insecure. He needs validation. He needs approval. He is constantly, desperately seeking reassurance that he is the best, the most loved, the most admired. And that contradiction, the God who needs his subjects to love him, is what makes him so unstable. We see this most clearly when he's challenged. When someone refuses to bend the knee, when someone questions him, and in those moments, we see the full extent of his rage.
With the changes around here, our EBITDA margins will drop a tiny bit. How do you want to handle that on the earnings call?
Do you think you know better than me? I don't know, maybe you think you should be sitting in my chair and...
Because it's not just anger, it's betrayal. How dare they not love him? How dare they not see him as the perfect being he knows himself to be? He sees any disobedience, any challenge, as an existential threat because his entire self-image is so paper-thin that even the smallest crack could shatter it completely. And this is what makes him even scarier than villains like Thanos or Darth Vader. Those characters, for all their evil, have reasons for what they do. Twisted, sure, but still reasons. Homelander? His actions are dictated entirely by his emotional state. He's not following some grand plan. He's not carrying out a calculated mission. He's just reacting. And there's nothing more dangerous than a god who acts on impulse. It's hard not to wonder about what will happen when he fully lets go. Power is a funny thing. Some people crave it, some are born into it. Others build it brick by brick. But what really makes someone terrifying isn't just their power, it's what they do with it. And no characters in fiction demonstrate this better than Homelander, Superman, Omni-Man, and Batman. They all represent different ideas of power, morality, and fear. Yet what makes them truly fascinating is how their backstories and choices reveal a deeper truth. Some people are born monsters, while others are forged by tragedy. And the real question is, what kind of tragedy shapes you into the hero, and what kind breaks you into something far worse? Homelander. Where do we even begin? If you've seen The Boys, you know that he isn't just a villain, he's a walking nightmare. The guy's got all the powers of Superman, but none of the humanity. What makes him so terrifying isn't just that he can melt your skull with his laser vision or crush you like a soda can. It's his sheer unpredictability. Homelander wasn't raised with love or kindness. He wasn't taught right from wrong. He was born in a lab, raised by scientists who treated him like a living science project, a test tube with a pulse and a god complex waiting to happen. No family, no moral lessons. No one ever sat him down and said, hey, here's how to be a decent human being.
Aggressive, downright hateful. You should have been raised in a home with a family who loved you, not in a cold lab with doctors.
And yet, I turned out great.
The result? A man with the powers of a god and the emotional maturity of a toddler with a flamethrower. He doesn't just crave power, he needs it. Desperately. It's the only thing that fills that bottomless pit inside him. Every interaction with Homelander feels like holding a hand grenade with the pin already pulled. One wrong word, one sideways glance, and it's game over. Remember that scene on the plane? He's standing there surrounded by terrified passengers, and for a split second you think, maybe he'll save them. He could. It would be so easy. But instead, he just watches them scream, panic, beg for their lives, until the plane plummets into the ocean. Why? Not because he can't save them, but because it's too complicated, too inconvenient. To Homelander, human life is just a flickering candle, blown out with the slightest breath. Now compare that to Superman. On paper, Superman and Homelander should be the same person. They're both gods walking among mortals, both infinitely powerful and invincible to almost everything. But the difference is, Superman had parents, not scientists, not corporate handlers, real parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent. Two ordinary, good-hearted people from Kansas who found a baby in a spaceship and decided to raise him like their own son. They didn't see a weapon when they looked at Clark. They saw a child who needed love, guidance, and a moral compass. And that's what makes Superman who he is. His power could have made him unstoppable, a king, a conqueror. But the Kents taught him restraint. They taught him empathy. Superman doesn't just have power, he understands its weight. In Man of Steel, there's that brutal scene where Zod forces him into an impossible choice. Either kill him or let innocent people die. Superman makes the hard choice, but it wrecks him. You can see it in his face, the guilt, the sorrow. Every life matters to him. Every loss stays with him. If Homelander had been in that situation, he wouldn't have blinked. But Superman, he carries that weight forever. And then we have Omni-Man. If Superman is what happens when power is tempered by love, Omni-Man is what happens when power is shaped by cold, unrelenting duty. He's not from Earth. He's from Viltrum, a planet where compassion is a weakness and only the strong survive. Omni-Man wasn't sent to Earth to protect it, he was sent to conquer it. His mission is simple: infiltrate, dominate, and prepare the planet for annexation. He's not driven by personal ego or insecurity like Homelander. His brutality is methodical, almost surgical. Everything he does serves a purpose, and that's what makes him so terrifying. Take the subway scene in Invincible. Omni-Man forces his son Mark to watch as he obliterates an entire train of people. Bodies are crushed like paper cups, blood and shattered bones flying everywhere as the train barrels through what used to be human beings. Omni-Man doesn't flinch, not once. He doesn't do it because he enjoys it. He does it to teach Mark a lesson, to show him how insignificant human life really is. To him, humans are insects, temporary, fragile, disposable. Mark begs him to stop, but Omni-Man just keeps going, his voice cold and matter-of-fact. This isn't rage, it's not even personal, it's just duty. And yet, despite everything, there's something undeniably tragic about Omni-Man. He loves his family, and that love complicates his mission. It makes him hesitate, even if only for a second. Unlike Homelander, who has no soul to save, Omni-Man is constantly at war with himself. His mission demands one thing. His heart demands something else entirely. And then there's Batman, the odd one out. No superpowers, no alien origin, no godlike strength or laser vision, just a man with a dark past and a burning obsession. If Superman's story is about a god learning how to be human, Batman's story is about a human turning himself into something more. His origin isn't cosmic or ideological, it's deeply personal. Bruce Wayne was just a boy when he watched his parents die in that alley. He stood there frozen in shock as the gunshots echoed and their blood pooled beneath them. In that moment, something inside him shattered. But instead of letting that tragedy break him, Bruce turned it into his greatest weapon. He became the Batman. He didn't inherit power, he built it. Every ounce of strength, every skill, every piece of armor, he earned it through sheer willpower. But make no mistake, Batman is just as terrifying as any superpowered being. Not because of what he can do physically, but because of what he can do mentally. Batman knows how to break you, slowly, methodically. He's a tactician, always 10 steps ahead. In The Dark Knight Returns, he fights Superman and beats him, not with strength, but with strategy. While Homelander is a bomb waiting to go off, Batman is a scalpel, cutting away at his enemies until there's nothing left. So who's the scariest? Homelander? Omni-Man? Superman? Batman? It really depends on what kind of fear keeps you up at night. Homelander is the embodiment of power without empathy. He's a god with no boundaries and no conscience, a walking disaster waiting to happen. Omni-Man represents inevitability. His violence isn't random or chaotic, it's cold, calculated, and unstoppable. Superman represents the fear of what happens when the best of us lose control. And Batman represents obsession, the fear of what happens when trauma consumes you and becomes your entire identity. The truth is, these characters reflect different parts of human nature. Homelander shows us what happens when power corrupts completely. Omni-Man shows us the danger of ideology without compassion. Superman reminds us that power can be good if tempered with love and restraint, and Batman is proof that even ordinary people can become something extraordinary if they're willing to sacrifice everything. But here's the real question. Are some people born monsters, or does the world make them that way? In the end, it's not power that defines these characters. It's how they choose to wield it. And whether you're more afraid of Homelander's chaos, Omni-Man's cold logic, Superman's potential, or Batman's relentless pursuit of justice, one thing's for sure. Power doesn't corrupt. It reveals who we really are.
But they followed them.
Doesn't matter what you do to Mayor or the rest of the staff here. Your need for love is so deep. It's so human. You'll never be able to overcome that.
That's where you're wrong. I'm not human.
The elevator dings softly. The lab staff freeze, exchanging nervous glances. No one was supposed to arrive unannounced. The security cameras are down, phones are dead. The doors slide open, and standing there, perfectly at ease, is Homelander, smiling, holding a chocolate ice cream cake in a plain white box. If you didn't know any better, you'd think he was here for a party. But this isn't a party. This is an execution. Homelander steps into the room, his eyes sweeping over the terrified staff. For a moment, there's silence.
Homelander.
Then, with a warm, almost nostalgic tone, he speaks.
Homelander.
He locks eyes with Frank, the head technician.
recognize Frank?
Frank, remember that time you put me in the incinerator? His voice is calm, almost playful. Said it was a game. You told me it wouldn't hurt if I didn't scream. Frank's face turns pale as he stammers, trying to deny it. But Homelander cuts him off with a laugh, a genuine childlike laugh, as if the memory brings him joy. Let's play that game again, Frank, he says, gesturing toward the industrial incinerator in the corner. It'll be fun. And just like that, Frank is gone, reduced to ashes, while Homelander crumples a paper ball and tosses it into the trash can, chuckling softly at his own precision. This is what makes Homelander different. Not just his power or his sadism, but the sheer unpredictability. One moment he's reminiscing like an old friend, the next he's committing murder with the ease of swatting a fly. It's terrifying because it feels so real. He's not a caricature of evil. He's the worst parts of humanity dialed up to 11. Then there's Marty, the assistant director. Homelander turns to him next, recounting a humiliating childhood memory when Marty laughed at him for touching himself in the lab. Hey Marty, he says with a wink. How about you return the favor right here in front of everyone? Marty stares, frozen in shock, and before he can even respond, Homelander's eyes glow red. A thin beam of heat cuts across the room and Marty drops, lifeless, a burning hole through his body. What's terrifying here isn't just the brutality, it's the casualness of it all. There's no rage, no theatrics, just a man so utterly untouchable that morality is a distant concept, something that applies to other people, but never to him. Finally, Barbara Finley, the boss, arrives. She confronts Homelander with the truth that no one else dares say aloud. You always could have left the lab, but you didn't, she tells him. Because Vought's psychologist made sure you would always crave their approval. For a split second you see it, the crack in his perfect, confident facade. And it's terrifying, because deep down, Homelander isn't just a god pretending to be a man. He's a broken child, desperate for validation, trapped by his own need to be loved. And that's when you realize the most dangerous villains aren't the ones who want to rule the world. They're the ones who want to be loved by it, no matter how many bodies they leave in their wake. Right now, he still needs the love of the public. He still cares, at least a little, about maintaining the illusion of being a hero. But the second he decides that doesn't matter anymore, the moment he stops pretending, that's when the real horror begins. And the worst part is, it feels inevitable. Right now, the only thing keeping him from unleashing total destruction is his need to be admired. But that admiration is fickle, and we've already seen the cracks forming. The moment he realizes that fear is just as good as love, that he doesn't need adoration, only obedience, that's when the real nightmare begins. I think that's what makes him so endlessly compelling. He's not just terrifying because of what he can do. He's terrifying because we know he hasn't even reached his full potential yet.
You have to be good, and you have to listen to me, and then we both can get what we want.
The worst is still to come, but here's the uncomfortable truth. Homelander isn't just a villain, he's a mirror. He reflects the worst aspects of human nature, our narcissism, our need for validation, our hunger for control. And he asks us in his own terrifying way, what would you do if no one could stop you? That's the scariest question of all. Because we like to think we'd be different, that we'd be kind, that we wouldn't let power corrupt us. But history tells a different story. Time and time again, people with absolute power have let it rot them from the inside out. And Homelander is that idea taken to its ultimate terrifying extreme. And that's why he's the most terrifying villain ever created. Because he isn't some far-off fictional nightmare. He's something that could, in some form, exist in the real world. Something that, in small ways, we've already seen. He's the reflection of what happens when someone has power without limits, validation without question, and no one to tell them no. And once you recognize that, once you really sit with that thought, you realize the most terrifying thing of all. Homelander isn't scary because he's so different from us. He's scary because he's so close.
Want them to love me.
Gutsy!
Only it never seems to work out, does it? Madeline, Maeve, Stormfront, even your own son. So why do you keep running headfirst into the same brick wall? I don't know. Pants on fire, you know. It's because deep down there's a part of you that is still human. No. Part of you is a dirty, shriveled, anemic little part of you that still mules for approval and love and a mommy and a daddy and a boo-woo-woo. Look at me, Tiger. Look at me. We gotta cut that part of you out like a cancer. And then, well then, my boy, you can finally be who you were always meant to be.
If this narrative resonated with you, do support us. Hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe. Thank you for staying with us to the end. See you in the next video on Plaid Chronicles.